Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, and I am here today with the team of Zero Ghost from 24/7 Comics. We have an awesome panel. We're going to be talking about the new comic book and the Kickstarter that's going on right now that you'll be able to go check out. And we're also going to talk to some legends from the comic book industry as well. So lots of great stuff and good information to happen here. Hey, what's up, Zero Ghost team? How's it going, everybody?
Hey, what's up?
What's up?
So just to introduce everybody that's on the panel, we have Carl and TheNerdyBarbie, aka Sarah from 24/7 Comics. And then we also have the Zero Ghost creative team, or at least most of it here. We've got Justin Jordan, Brian Ching, and Wil Quintana all joining us on the panel. So hey to everybody. So first off, we got to talk about this because Zero Ghost, the campaign's going on right now. Kickstarter is happening right now. We've got about 9 days left on it at the time of recording here. It's already fully funded. It's really exciting. So I just am curious, how are you guys all feeling about the Zero Ghost launch? How's it going so far for you? Is it going as expected, or are you happy about it?
So far, so
I'm
good.
excited.
I mean, very thankful for everyone supporting. And, I think for us coming into this, as 24/7 Comics, at least, this is one of our first titles. And Justin was the first creator that signed on with our team. And so there's a lot of meaning behind this release. And it's also a title that, we feel very strongly about, and hopefully the audience can feel the same.
Yeah, and that actually leads us probably right to the first question that people are going to have here, and people may not be familiar with the Zero Ghost campaign. Of course, we do have the link in the description for this video, so you can go check it out right now if you want to follow along. But let's talk to Justin. Justin's the writer of Zero Ghost, and I think that story is a great place to start. So I am curious, what is the story and the setup for Zero Ghost, and how did that idea come to fruition?
Sure. Zero Ghost is the story of Kira Kaine, who is the heir to a magical crime family, whose family is ambushed, and she is offered up as a sacrifice to try and control a supernatural entity called a death angel. She manages to thwart the ritual, and that causes her to become bonded to the death angel, which naturally she goes on a roaring rampage of revenge to try and figure out who betrayed her family and ruined her life. The problem is that the death angel, SHRIKE's supernatural abilities use her soul as fuel. So the closer she gets to revenge, the closer she gets to death. So that's Zero Ghost, which is really just my love letter to, honestly, it's a lot of, probably the two big influences on it are 90s comics like Witchblade and The Darkness, and also 80s and 90s John Woo and Hong Kong action movies. And I kind of glommed those together into one thing with a dash of John Wick, and then added some extra magic, and Zero Ghost is what got spat out the other end.
Nice. It is a really cool concept. I've had a chance to read through the comic book, and I think that you definitely pick up on a lot of those thematic homages to different types of genres or things that we all love from that time period and that type of storytelling. I am curious, when it comes to the art side, that's kind of the story side. How did the world building for the art side develop? I'd love to hear from the art team here and kind of hear about character designs and the look, how much of it was taken directly from what Justin was describing, and how much of it was some inspirations that were added by the art team, and how do you feel like the final look turned out? What's your impressions of that?
So I think a lot of the character designs were in the descriptions already. And then when I came onto the project, it was, I did a test piece for our main character, Kira, just to see if Carl, Justin, and I were on the right page, see if it feels the right fit. And then I came out with this Kira drawing her costume was a little influenced by Bruce Lee, the Bruce Lee colors from his Game of Death outfit, the strong yellow and the black pinstripes. And it started there, and then it seemed like Carl and Justin and I, it just seemed like the right fit from the get-go. And spent a couple months designing all the characters together, getting feedback from the guys, and from there, just a go. Like Justin said, a lot of John Wick was our early influence. The more I worked on it, the more. So when I start a project, I'll tend to watch movies to try and get the vibe, get the tone of what I want to do, and it was Blade and Blade 2 that kind of stuck with me. Sort of this where where the Wesley Snipes character Blade, especially in Blade 2, he seems to really enjoy being in that world. So that was sort of where I was taking it, I think, with the tone with Kira. She's kind of miserable in the first issue, but as we go along, you'll start to see her that little smirk, that little smile, the little mischievous smile that we have, and yeah. So that's sort of where I got started with building up I guess, the tone of the series, and yeah, it was a pretty quick flow into that, and then yeah, things just really came together when Will started coloring it, and it's just amazing. Will's like using all this ambient light, reflective light to give it that sort of like night Hong Kong feel with the fluorescent lights and all that. And yeah, it's like a running joke between us that when Will sends in colors, we're just ecstatic. We're like little kids, clicking on that email to see the the latest pages.
Oh yeah, the colors in this, they really pop. It really brings a lot of atmosphere and personality to the comic book. Will, what was that process like for you in terms of, were those the colors you were seeing right away, or did you kind of develop that as you were working on the story, and how do you feel about how it turned out?
Yeah, it was something that slowly developed as I was working through the series. At first, it was a little like it took a bit of a learning curve, some time for me to like work and communicate with Brian as to what we were looking for in the book and in terms of color. And then once we started like getting the settings right and like, getting the feel of it, I just kind of got into the groove of it. And I love doing the city scenes because, as Brian was saying, I love being able to use the neon as like key lighting and fill lighting on the bodies and faces. And with Brian's like amazing art, he leaves it open enough for me to be able to do stuff like that. So it's been a beautiful like marriage, I'd say, in a lot of ways. It's slowly really evolved into that.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I'm hearing from the three of you is that it almost seemed like this is kind of a maybe a more fun project than some others, perhaps, or something like that. But I think that's definitely coming out in the final product. Is you can kind of see, especially as the issues go on, there's almost just sort of like this opening up of this world, and it's pretty cool because you're getting introduced to this new world, and then you actually get to see it open up and kind of fill out and be more colorful and be more dynamic, and the characters, like the smirk is appearing, like you were saying. And there's a lot of that going on. It's really awesome to see. So it had to be a very fun experience working on this book. I just shows in the final product. So that's really awesome to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things was being able to communicate directly with Brian. That's not something, that's always necessarily done in the business. Usually you're dealing with an editor, then the editor communicates the stuff to the artist and then communicates it back to you. But, working with Brian, it felt more like, with the direct communication, it felt more like the studio environment that I was used to coming up at Cross Jam and stuff like that.
Right on. Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question, because I really wanted to make sure, since we're talking about the Kickstarter, I really wanted to make sure to touch on that early in the show. But one of the things I actually do when I have people on the show, since we're talking about comic books, it goes so naturally hand in hand with this. So many people are going to be exposed to everybody on this panel for the first time. It's just a big business. So I love to talk about comic book origin stories, and it's one of the questions I love to ask. And what I mean by that is, I'm curious, what was your first interaction with comic books? And we'll go around the entire panel here and we'll get everybody's take on this, because I'm always curious to hear about how people got into comic books and what stuck with them and what their first kind of loves of comics were, and how that's kind of been the through line usually for where they end up in their career, or how it may have changed how they end up later on in their careers. So, we'll just go straight around the clock here. So Will, you're first up. I am curious, what is your comic book origin story? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I guess it started when I was interning at, I don't know if anyone remembers Valiant Comics, but I was interning at Valiant Comics. Some people might remember there was a guy named Sean Chen that worked there as well. And but I was just interning. He was the pro, and I was interning. And from there, I just kind of gradually transitioned into working at a coloring studio. Actually, there were a lot of coloring studios back at that day. And the one I worked at was Atomic Paintbrush. And Atomic Paintbrush had begun doing all the Valiant books when they had transitioned into Acclaim. So I got a gig at that studio and started posting stuff online at Comic Colorists Unite back then. And Brandon Peterson had been hired as the art director at CrossGen Comics. This was like in the late 90s, maybe 99. And he contacted me early 2000 and offered me a gig here in Tampa at CrossGen Studios. And I jumped on it right away.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And I mean, and that is an awesome story. So many blasts from the past there for me, especially. That was the prime of when I started like reading comics and getting into comic books. Do you remember the first comic book you ever read, or the first like series you were reading when you were a kid by chance?
Yeah, it was Secret Wars.
Nice.
Yeah,
Classic.
yeah.
Right on. Did you pick up the first issue, or did you pick up like, was it the Spidey issue or something along the way?
No, I was picking up the issues before then. I was picking up like #1 issues and all that stuff. I was following it from issue 1. Totally.
Vintage. I love it.
Yeah.
Carl, I'm actually really curious because we've had the pleasure of talking several times. I actually am not sure I actually know the answer to this one. So what is your first forays into comic books? What's your origin story?
Have we never talked about it? Man, comic books saved my life, man. Bronze. I mean, first of all, super thankful that you're helping us with this, because to us, it's about building this community, and for you to obviously share your influence with us, totally appreciate it. And I think that's one of the most special things about the comic book industry. But yeah, comic books saved my life. I moved here as a kid, 8-year-old. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know the culture. I had no friends. I still remember getting seated in my second grade class between a Hapa, half Asian, half Caucasian woman, a girl, and then a seventh generation Chinese American. One spoke Taiwanese, the other spoke only English. I spoke Cantonese. And so we couldn't communicate, and it was just really hard to like make friends, right? And obviously I discovered later in life I'm heavily dyslexic. So I was not only in ESL class, I was in special needs class, and it just felt like it was hard to acclimate. And so it wasn't until I was like maybe 12 or 13, and my cousin actually brought a stack of comics that he picked up. And I remember Wolverine as the character that stood out to me. And it was Frank Miller, the Wolverine #1 cover. And I dove into that story, and what was really cool about it was, because I was dyslexic, it was always hard for me to engage like paper and stories and written material. But with comic books, it was easy. Like it really like latched onto my imagination. So at one point, like I was literally like going to sleep and dreaming about comics, and every day I would save my lunch money for the comic book day, and I would spend all that money on comics. And then eventually I started working at a comic book shop when I was 14 years old. And, for a few years, I was deep into it. I read everything and anything. And anything I made at the comic book shop, I bought comics. And so obviously when I discovered Cars and Girls, I disappeared from the comic book world. And also the 90s crash really hurt me, because the stuff that was coming out wasn't the stuff I was, growing up reading anymore. And so, college and all that. And then about 30s, I actually had a little bit of a quarter life crisis. And I went on a road trip, and I actually flew to Vancouver, and I got a car and I just started driving. So I drove north through the Yukon territories, through Whitehorse, all the way up to Fairbanks in Alaska. And when I was in Alaska, I walked into this comic book shop in Fairbanks and had a conversation with a guy. And that's when he recommended Luther Strode and Chew as 2 books I should check out. And that's when I started reading comics again. And so that's kind of the whole, cycle of how everything came together. And years later, I met Justin right before the pandemic, and then we started working together during the pandemic. So here we are.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Cool.
That's an awesome story.
Fun. Yeah, it's crazy. So it's played a huge role in my life, for sure. I think it taught me a lot about American culture, taught me a lot about everything, just being a superhero and all these stories. I mean, X-Men, for example, was the outcast, right? The guys that were not accepted into mainstream. And that was me, and that was very relatable. And so it's kind of cool. Like, I know everyone says that now, but everyone seems like growing up now. Like, I'm sure you guys meet a lot of people too, that I grew up collecting comics, but I really lived in it. And so it was a big part of me. In fact, recently I posted a picture of me and I think it was like 7th grade with a Wolverine and Punisher T-shirt with a mullet. So that was me.
Oh, that is so awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
No, Brian, we're going to come to you, and you've had an amazing career, very prolific career. I cannot wait to hear a little bit more about how you got into comic books, not only as on the industry side, which I'm definitely curious to hear about, but also just as maybe a reader or as a fan. What was your experience like, Brian?
Oh God, I was a little kid. God, it was maybe like 40 years ago. And my brother took me to 7-Eleven. He probably just wanted a Slurpee or something like that. And so I was in the corner at the comic rack, the spinner comic rack. And it's probably one of those Marvel reprints, Steve Ditko Spider-Man reprint that I picked up. It was probably like 25 cents, 30 cents at the time. And I just picked it up, and I just remember being just totally engaged in it. And then shortly after, my mom bought me one of those, it's like at Kmart, they would have these collections. It wasn't How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. It was like some other books that were kind of like that. And she bought me one. And I was just kind of, I was deep in it after that. But my fondest memories are of the John Byrne Fantastic Four. I don't know what age I was, but I started seeing that, and I was just blown away by the artwork. And then, sort of like how you kind of reach an age where you kind of put comics away, you start to get more involved. I was playing a lot of tennis in high school, things like that. And then, sort of my last year of high school was when Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, I think Liefeld all exploded. And then I started heading back to the comic store, and yeah, it was the Jim Lee stuff. It was the Punisher War Journal. I think he has the cover with Punisher and Wolverine side by side attacking each other. And that was the thing that pulled me back in. And I was just pretty much glued from that point on. Just became a huge, huge Jim Lee fan and just collected everything he did. Yeah, I remember that was super exciting for me. And like Carl, just reading comics in bed at night, just like it would be the last thing I would read before I go to sleep. And then didn't care about the quality of it because I would fall asleep on the comics, so they'd be all bent after, and I was okay with it, but it was a reading experience that I was going for. So yeah, that was the beginning of my reading and / collecting experience.
Sweet.
As far as getting into comics, I had sent my portfolio around to all the studios, and Top Cow reached out and asked me to come in. So I met with one of their editors, and they liked the samples. They said, why don't you hang around, sort of like an unpaid internship. You could hang out in the bullpen and just interact with the artists and show them your work and get feedback from them. And then later on, I found out that Mike Turner, who was on Witchblade at the time, was late. He was constantly late. So I was brought in to light a fire under him. But they didn't tell me that. and so when I got introduced to Mike, it was kind of abrupt. Sort of like, hey, how you doing? And then he would just kind of go back to work. And I guess they wanted him to see me be around. But eventually, I did start to do background work for him on Witchblade. And then you just sort of like away in the studio and started doing backgrounds for Dave Finch, a little for Joe Benitez, and then just start to like build up rapport with everyone. You start to kind of see how figures are created, how everyone's structural process for creating comics, and then you just sort of like start to absorb all of that, and that's how I got in.
Very cool. Yeah, the whole top, I was mentioning earlier, the whole Top Cow era, that beginning of that kind of studio was just a huge moment in comic books for people that were collecting it, especially at my age. And it was just so much great, content coming out from there. So really a great legacy. Awesome to hear that story. Thank you very much. Sarah, I'm really curious to hear your comic book origin story and kind of how you got into comic books. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, so I am predominantly a toy collector. I'd always loved comics, been around it, but as a really young kid, I was obsessed with Dick Tracy and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So I remember my grandparents very frequently reading those to me. Then kind of like forgot about it, kind of grew up, but my high school sweetheart was a Marine and was shipped off, and it was between video games and comic books that I really got back into it, because I realized around that time you never have to say goodbye to characters in comic books. You can fall in love with these characters, and whether it's fan fiction developing into something mainstream, you never have to say goodbye to these characters. And it really, that's when the collection started growing. Fast forward, he comes back, we have this like massive collection, started getting into Batman, and that's just like a never-ending story for comics. So my adult comic life has been through cosplay predominantly, and it's just another way of never letting go of these characters and meeting artists now that are responsible for what I've based the majority of my like refusal to grow up on. It's been an incredible experience. I feel like I'm starting to collect now and kind of forget about the toy world. And I mean, just meeting you guys and learning so much about it, I can't wait to keep on going. And especially with Zero Ghost, knowing you all and being part of it from the beginning has been something I wouldn't trade for the world. So I'm just beginning, but I'm in the best hands. So excited.
No, that's really cool. And especially hearing it, at least me, I talk to comic book people that are all about comic books all the time. But so many of us are into things that are adjacent to that, like cosplay, like figures. So you mentioned the primary passion of having been the toy world. I'm really curious. Do you have like a toy grail type toy out there still for you that you're still chasing? That's like the one you want?
Honestly, I kind of screwed up a lot of my original Star Wars toys that I'd gotten from my father. Like legs chewed off, my Millennium Falcon, the stickers are peeling off. I didn't know to take care of things. So for me personally, it's all about replacing those things. I'm going to keep these forever, but to have a really ridiculous, like new or pristine or mint condition of things that I feel like I let myself down with, that's my ultimate dream. Just to be like, hey, here's what it was supposed to look like.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah. Well, good luck on your journey with that. I know that can be comic book collectors were used to expensive grails and comics. That can be a very expensive one as well. So definitely wish you luck on that journey. That's awesome. Justin, we come to you. I'm really curious to hear about your comic book origin story as well. How did you get into comic books? How did you get into the business of writing these awesome comic books that you've come up with? And what's your origin story been like?
Man, I'll try to do the relatively short version of this, which will probably still be as long as everyone else's combined. So I have almost literally always been in the comics. So my two earliest memories are how I got this scar that you probably can't see on camera, and reading a Popeye comic. I say reading. I was literally 2. So, reading a Popeye comic that had the Sea Hag and the Goons in it, actually. Which I'm assuming my mom grabbed off the newspaper rack or the magazine rack at a grocery store to keep me, interested while we were at the grocery store. And sorry, my cat's looking at me. What? Am I disturbing you? Sorry. And I never got away from it. So I kind of segued from there into the Stan Lee written Spider-Man that was in the Electric Company magazine that I had when I was a little kid, and then I started picking stuff up from the newsstands. I'm of a sufficient age, just actually like everyone but Sarah, I think, of the Zero Ghost cast and crew here. We're all of an age to have been getting our comics when we were still on the newsstand when we were kids and that kind of stuff. Especially as I grew up and I'd still live in very rural Pennsylvania. So there weren't any comic book shops around. I actually didn't get to a comic book shop until I was 18 or 19 years old. And I didn't get to a comic convention until I was in my late 20s. But in the midst of all that, when I went to college, it was just when kind of the internet was really becoming a thing. I went to school in '96. By 2000, it was pretty developed. And 2000 is significant. It's because when I had started lurking at the Warren Ellis Forum, and whatever else the Warren Ellis Forum has become, especially since Warren has turned out to be an asshole, it was kind of ground zero for a lot of people that are in comics right now. And so it was the place where I realized, well, I can't draw, and I don't know anybody who can draw, but I could use this fancy internet thing, this information superhighway, which might have been going to become a thing to find artists to do stuff. So I started writing, and I spent basically 10 years doing small press anthologies, pitches, self-published mini comics, and that sort of thing. I used to go to a copy shop, and that's copy, not coffee, and make copies of a thing. And then I didn't have a big enough stapler to copy the mini comics to staple them. So I would have to flip the stapler open, staple it, flip it over, and hammer the staples flat, because I also didn't have any money. So I did that for 10 years and amassed a bunch of stuff. And eventually in 2009, I had come up with the idea for Luther Strode, which briefly is about a regular high school kid who gets and sends away for a Charles Atlas style bodybuilding course, gets it, does it, and develops superhuman powers, but ends up the target of a murder cult as old as mankind. Standard story, but I was determined to do it. And I happened to be looking around at 100 Bullets fan art on DeviantArt, and I came across Trad Moore, who was at that point between his junior and senior year at Savannah College of Art and Design. I think it was junior and senior, either that or it was sophomore and junior. But he was like 20, so he was a Ute, and we put together the pitch for Luther Strode, which we eventually brought Felipe on, who will be with us at New York Comic Con this year. And I sent that into Image Comics, and and it was a blind submission to their email submission thing. It's the same email address that they use now, as far as I know. And in a really unreasonable amount of time, Eric Stevenson emailed me back and said, and I quote, "Yeah, we'll publish this," which is the entirety of my contract with Image Comics for Luther Strode to this day. And I was, which blows my lawyer's mind. It was literally like a 20-minute conversation for me to get them to understand that, like, we have never had a contract with them for that. I have on my other books, some of my other books, but that one, no, that's still a handshake deal, which was funny. So it ended up until we were actually doing production, and honestly, in my heart of hearts, until we actually got printed copies of it, I wasn't convinced it was actually going to happen, because it was all so informal and like seat of the pants. But Strode, unsurprisingly, because it has Trad and Felipe on art, made a pretty big impression on people. And I kind of went from 10 years of obscurity to almost immediately having a career. That's when Wil mentioned Valiant. I am by easily the person on this panel with the most, who has written the most Valiant books, because I wrote for them in the revival in 2009. I brought Shadow Man back for them, which was one of my first works. My first three kind of things were, I actually did an issue of Hack Slash for Tim Seeley, 2 issues of Hack Slash, actually, which was actually a lot of fun. I love Hack Slash and Tim. And then I did Team 7 at DC, which I'm not a huge fan of. I am a huge fan of Team 7 as a concept. My book, boy, being thrown in the New 52 as a new writer who had only ever written stuff for themselves before was an experience. And then I did Shadow Man at Valiant, the revival of that, which had last been written by Garth Ennis, I think, before me. Not immediately before me, back during the Acclaim days. So, no pressure. And then actually the DC work actually led to me meeting Wil, because we worked on Green Lantern's New Guardian together for like 20 issues. And so when we were putting together Zero Ghost, Will was my first choice for colorist, because when I work with people who are making me look awesome, I like to keep clinging to them like a remora, just siphoning off all that extra talent. So. And so 10 years later, it's 15 years later now, I still have a comics career. So I got in and they have yet to throw me out, although it's, a little dodgy this year, but we're getting there.
Oh, that is really cool. That's just such an awesome story. I think a lot of people who, are comic fans want to eventually either work in comics or work around comic books. And myself, I've always wanted to be a writer, so it was really cool to hear that story. That's just awesome to know that you've had that kind of success in history there.
I'm going to use this opportunity to make a terrible plug, which is my company, Death or Comics, which does in fact exist, is all about educating people on how to write comics and putting together comic book teams and that kind of stuff. We're still very early days as we record this. I say that I've been working on it for a couple of years, but it is hard to build, at least if you're me, hard to build a new thing while you are also trying to make a living doing the thing. So it's been hard to get that going as well as want, but the mailing list exists. So if you Google deathercomics.com, you should get to us. But yeah, and just to interrupt you again and segue about that. Yeah, in particular, not that I necessarily recommend this, but I was just having a conversation about it today, as I've had a weirdly solipsistic career as a writer, which is to say I've never taken a creative writing class, not even in college. Creative writing was not what I did. I was communications journalism, but it was electronic media. So it was about film editing and that kind of stuff is what I did. And I was a psych major before that. I have most of a psych degree. So, but in terms of actual creative fiction writing, I've never taken a class. I've done one writers group, which actually that writers group had a really good hit rate because there were 4 of us and 2 of us went on to actually do comics professionally. The other one was Brandon Seifert, who actually might well have been the guy who gave Carl Luther Strode in Fairbanks, Alaska, because he
Really?
I think in that era he was actually part-timing at a comic shop. Definitely he was and probably still is in Fairbanks.
That would be the craziest thing ever if that was the guy.
Was it the big guy with the glasses?
That's
so I coming up, there weren't really any online resources that I was aware of to learn how to write comics and that stuff. So I got a hold of early on. I saw somewhere, I think it was in one of the magazines, and it was not like Comics Journal, but there used to be magazines like Comic Scene that were available. And I think I just literally saw a photo of what a comic book script looked like, or what one person's comic book script looked like. And I was like, all right, cool, good enough. We'll do that. I knew what movie scripts look like. So the script form that I use to this day is that. All of which to say is that you can come from no ability to draw, no formal training, and no contacts in the industry and still break in. That is a thing that can be done. It is not easily done, but it is doable.
I agree. And I also think it's just staying curious, because I think Justin, Will, Brian, you guys know this. I'm probably the most nosy publisher you guys have ever worked with, because I asked you about your whole life and how you worked, when you worked, where you worked, who you worked with. And it's honestly just because I want to learn. I didn't live the life you guys lived. And, for me as a publisher in this generation, it's about problem solving. So for me, if there are things that hasn't changed for 30 years, maybe it's broken, maybe it's not. But there are also things that I've learned through you guys that are just the SOPs that need to be in place for any publisher. So I think, stay curious. I do agree, sign up for Justin's company, because he's been preparing this for a long time. I'm aware and exposed to it, and my niece interned for them. So definitely support what they're doing and sign up for that newsletter, because if you want to break into the industry, I think Justin's one of the guys I've learned the most from.
Yes, as Carl has learned, if you ask me about the nuts and bolts of the industry, I will go on it excruciatingly. So...
Yeah,
and awesome. I'm a sponge, man. I take it all in, so I'm thankful, and I still call him all the time. So now I was gonna put that online for you guys. So please sign up.
That's true. That is actually, yeah. The whole remit of Death or Comics is actually, honestly, like, I looked at and was thinking about, and this is not all meant to be a pitch for that, but what I was trying to do was look at what did exist, and I found really helpful when I was coming up, which was the forum, Warren Ellis forum, and that environment. Not the Warren Ellis macking on women aspect of it, but like the community that kind of built almost in spite of him, honestly, almost in spite of him. And then the stuff that wasn't there that I wished was there. And I'm trying to build that thing that I wished was there when I was coming up, because I wish it were less hard for people than it were for me. It worked out for me, but like, it was hard. Like there was a lot of fruitless work in there, which is, I think, might be the path of any artist. But like, if we can make it easier for the people that come after us, we should.
Yeah, I know people are going to appreciate that, because it's something that, those sorts of things have always been a part of comics in our history, are people who have been successful kind of explaining to people who really want to do it, hey, what are some things that might work? What are some strategies? And it's very beneficial. It actually sort of segues me to one of my next questions, which is actually for the entire panel, but primarily for the 24/7 team that we have here with Carl and Sarah. I'm curious, this is now kind of the big sophomore campaign pretty much for 24/7, and we've been doing the Kickstarter model. There's a lot of people out there that are wondering about Kickstarter comic books and crowdfunded in general, not just that platform, but how it works. And you guys have been doing this for a little while now with a couple different campaigns under your belt. Like Evermind was extremely successful. It was awesome. Now we have this campaign, which is, it looks amazing. It's been successful as well so far. What have we learned about comics Kickstarters? How is it informing what you are going to be doing with other things in the future? How do you feel about your first forays into this? For people out there that are wondering about things like self-publishing and publishing on crowdfunding and kind of starting it by themselves, do you have any advice for them that you want to share with us?
Sure. I'll chime in on kind of like the macro side. I would love for Sarah to share about her journey with social media, because she's totally killing it for us in this campaign and is doing really well. So I think on the macro side, I think it was an experiment at first with Evermind, to be completely honest, to really test the reaction from the audience, because we're a very new publisher. We attended Comics Pro for the first time this last year, and for those of you who don't know what Comics Pro is, it's actually the retail trade organization that basically brings all the comic book shops, distributors, as well as publishers together every year. And what you do is all the publishers get to pitch the books you have coming out. And so I didn't actually go and do the pitch, but my friend David, who's over at Distillery, he invited me to be his guest because he said, you have to see this. And so I did. And so it was really good, because I got to see just the way the industry think about things. And one of the major learnings was that, hey, as a retailer who wants to take chances on independent comic books, fine, I'll take a chance on you, but please do some marketing and get your audience into my store so they actually buy the books. So that's number one. Two is, we definitely saw a really interesting year this year, because I don't know what the years previously was like, but it was kind of cool to see like Marvel and DC admit to some of the mishaps that's taken place as far as like decision making, how the disconnect between them and the feature film side of things, which I think drives a lot of sales, and then just overall like quality of material, right? And so they were really upfront about that and was committed to change, which I thought was really powerful. And then third, learning that it wasn't just us. It was actually a ton of new publishers. There was a lot of new spinoffs leading up to Comics Pro this year. IDW had a major layoff. And so there was like literally 3 new publishers that came from that in itself. So what was cool is I've been able to now build a community of different publishers, and we learn from each other. And to be honest, I'm probably the newest, but I do bring a different perspective to the table because my background is media. And so, just to know this, I talk to Dinesh all the time, talk to David, Distillery all the time, and Dinesh and Bad Idea. They both are approaching things from different angles, but they're all so very familiar with the industry as a whole. So I learned a ton from them, but at the same time, I also try to bring something unique to the table in the way we approach things as well. But with Kickstarter, we've learned it's a cadence for each of our titles that has to take place first. So if you think about like a Apple iPhone launch, Kickstarter is our version of that. So it's like our kind of quarterly Apple announcement of our new product. And then as we evolve through the pipeline, we're going to be introducing different channels. But until those channels are proven and we're consistently growing, we won't expand too far. Like, so for example, as a little bit of a preview, we do have a channel that we're going to open up as far as sales channel goes after this Kickstarter. And then you'll also find that this Kickstarter will fulfill much faster than our last campaign. And so our whole thing is, we realize people don't like waiting for stuff, and so why make them wait? So as we speak today, the Zero Ghost books are already in production, and so we'll see how fast they can land in your mailboxes. But we grew up in the Amazon generation, so we do feel like Kickstarter is that launching pad, and then we do have some plans as to how to roll these things out. And then the other side of thinking is also collectability. So I think, Bronze, you and I and Swaggle, we're all friends in that world as well. I feel like, there's going to be some importance when it comes to collectability and limited editions. So we will differentiate our print runs that are happening on Kickstarter to the ones that do ever eventually land in the stores to eventually the ones that lands in convention. So we are going to be very intentional about the versions as well as the print run. So it's all transparent. Everyone knows what they're getting. And ultimately, I really want to bring back the collectability of comics again.
Totally. And I have to take a second to just say, as somebody, this is something I talk about on my channel all the time. Transparency and those types of things from publishers, from a lot of different players in the comic book game is something that collectors, I think, are starving for. So that kind of stuff is amazing to hear. That's really good that you're keeping that top of mind. As a collector yourself, I'm sure that helps a little bit. Knowing the field up front is a big deal for collectors. So that's really awesome to hear. Cool.
Yeah. No. If you look inside our Zero Ghost ash can that Justin and I was handing out at HeroesCon, and we had some available at San Diego Comic Con as well. Right there. Thanks, Sarah. Flip to the last inside page, and there's literally a print run number on there that says, what does it say? Yeah, that one.
Says congratulations on getting your hands on this very limited ash can edition, limited to 1,000 editions. We hope you enjoyed reading Zero Ghost. Please give us your feedback by emailing us at community@247comics.com.
Yeah, so it's been great. Like, comic book shops have helped us distribute. We love comics in Florida, have given us like a ton of feedback. Golden Apple help us plant in their stores. Collectors Paradise, Ed over there. Who else? Comics Factory. Big fan of Brian's, and Brian, George keeps bothering me to ask you to go do a signing there at some point. So yeah, no, there's a lot of fans of the team, this creative team here, and they want support. And so for us, we don't try to like stuff it down every shop's kind of inventory if they don't want it. But if they reach out and they're truly excited, we want to equip them to help us evangelize. And I believe that over time we'll build a true network of stores that are truly passionate about what we're doing. And hopefully the audience will continue supporting those stores as well.
Totally. 100%. I mean, that's exactly, like, I think the quality of the releases that 24/7 is putting out, it's going to build a reputation for 24/7, and those later releases are going to, they're going to catch even more fire. People are going to start looking back at things like Evermind and Zero Ghost and start like, hey, I needed to get in on those, and the print runs are a little limited. I got to get them out there, and that really helps with that kind of that factor as well.
Yeah, that's the hope. I'm gonna pick your brain too when we start launching our web store, which is basically next. We're trying to decide like how transparent. Is it better to say, a few left, many left, or whatever, or is it better to just throw the number on there? So we haven't decided yet, but I would love to pick the audience's mind as well.
Nice. All I'll say is stay away from warehouse finds. That's everybody's least favorite phrase when it comes to comic books. So that's a fantastic answer. I really appreciate that insight. One of the things that I have to do for this channel and to kind of advertise, and for some of the charity work I do for Heroes for Heroes, is social media. And social media is such a complex minefield. Sarah, the Nerdy Barbie, you are running social media for 24/7. I am so curious, what has your approach been to handling these comic book launches, and what kind of stuff have you learned in your experiences with doing these comic book launches?
It's been so fascinating because it's my first time doing social media for something that's not like a restaurant or a nightclub. So it's a completely different voice. And I'm very experimental with it. It really depends on what the post is, what the vibe is, like who it's about. I'm very cheeky with it because I think that's kind of becoming the voice of 24/7. Like I've done all kinds of different things. It's what I get the most responses for. And it's truly mind blowing because we have real professionals and peers of all of yours that are so supportive. It's like I'm friends with them now. Just communication, sharing, the community's amazing. But I'm also talking on a one-on-one basis with fans. This is the type of book where I literally have this and a couple variant versions with me. I let people read them. I'm 5 minutes from Golden Apple, so I have a bunch of people that have read it there. They're great. But really just on the social media side, being able to be that person that's like, you're not talking to nobody. I'm going to respond right away. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to annoy these guys with whatever you want to know. So it's been really interesting on the social media side too. It's not promotion and it's not advertisement. I believe so much in this. It's just about giving them the opportunity to see it. So it's been fantastic. We've had such great streams and collaborations, but for me, it's been really cool to see the natural organic growth of even just the Instagram, because I feel like a lot of comic book people are more on X and it's very cool. We get a direct connection you can watch, but watching the Instagram side grow where it's people who seem to be less in the know of comics that are really just seeing like the color and the writing and the art and being like, I don't even know, but I'm in. So it's been fascinating to kind of just talk about the cards because I'm always saying Zero Ghost is a universe I want to be a part of. I can see it becoming games and all these things. And it's like you try not to get too caught up in the future, but every step of the way, I see it inspiring more people. And then I'm not even going to get into the cosplay because there's something in the works there.
Ooh, teaser.
It's great.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
You guys made it really fun for me. I'm like, who do I want to be first? But I think we all know.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, it's just having fun. Like, Sarah's having so much fun.
I'm having so much fun.
Yeah, and I'm jumping in, and we're just, I think at the end of the day, when I grew up, like, watching the guys from Image, the guys from Valiant, Will, we talk about this. Like, you guys were just having a blast, and they reflect on the work you're doing. So for us, we're just trying to do that. And, like, I know sometimes I'm, like, having too much of a party, but, I try to bring everyone together along and just like have a good time because life is short. Time is our most valuable resource. So let's spend it together and spend it well.
You can be a fangirl, fanboy, and be like, but I know them. So it's just amazing. Having a blast.
No, it definitely shows. And like I said, in the comic, in the campaign, in all of it, the fun shows through. And hey, you know what? I'm all for that. We have so much negativity that happens in our world and all this. And comic books are an infamous form of escape for people. So having that fun escape is great to see. Speaking of escapes, we're going to escape the main portion of the interview for 1 second because part of this interview, what we set up is we set up a Reddit AMA. And we got a couple questions that came through from that. One of them is just fantastic, and I really want to make sure we get a chance to ask it to Justin before our time is up. Justin, we had from Reddit, from the AMA over on our comic books, we had Prof. Ponderosa asked, loved your work on Luther Strode. Can you share some of the creative process you and Tradmore used for the gorgeous choreography of action and violence? I think that's a great question. People are always curious. I know I'm always curious about how the writer and the artist work together to create some of those kinds of scenes that we love. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, fortunately, from the start, Trad and Felipe and I have worked really well together. We have almost from the beginning referred to ourselves as the hive mind because our ideas about stuff are almost always the same without even consulting each other. And it started off well and it became even more collaborative as time went. There's a reason that like we kind of list in Legacy of Luther Strode, the third series, that it's just Trad and I and Felipe as the creators. We don't really divvy up who's doing what anymore because it was sort of a process of that. So Luther Strode, to get a little pretentious, is meant to be a bit of a commentary on comic book violence. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was creating Strode was the fact that in comics, we are used to a certain level of desensitization towards violence, which is to say, like, for the most part, if you're reading a Batman comic, Batman will kick like the henchman's ass and knocks him out, and they're dangling from a light post, and that's it. Like, in reality, getting knocked out sucks, and you need to go to the hospital. Like, right? Like, so Luther Strode is as violent as it is to make the violence feel more real, and also internally is a bit of a commentary. There's a bit in Strange Talent where, if you read Strange Talent, I'm going to spoil my own 15-year-old comic here. It opens with a 3-page sequence where Luther has literally ripped some guys apart. And when you first see it, most people, and I found this to be true from people talking to me, and this was my intent, but you never know if intent equals what you get across to the reader, was for people to look at it and think of it as like sort of kick-ass, like literally kick-ass cool action, like that, you know, that kind of thing. And you see this again later in the series from the context of another character who is not, you know, seeped in violence, and it's horrifying, like something from a horror movie. And people have reacted the same way. They're like, well, it was cool the first time, but man, when we get back to it in like issue 5, like it's a nightmare. I'm like, there we go. Like, mission accomplished. So we got that done. So that's the violence aspect of it. With action scenes, so I am very specific about the beats that occur in action scenes. I am not a kind of person, and I think Brian can attest to this too, who will just write, you know, give me 5 pages of cool action art, person, and I'll script over it later. It's just, you know, please don't put in tanks or dinosaurs, and like, or please put in tanks or dinosaurs. Because I think for fights to be interesting, they need to have that same kind of rhythm of conflict that plot does just generally. And so the script would have them, but because I'm also not an idiot or not a complete idiot, I also knew that I was working with Trad, and I was like, look, if you've got better ideas about the specific things, as long as like this rhythm is there, like, go wild. So a lot of it was for me, like, I would write stuff, but like, particularly in the later series for stuff that is more artistically complex, like in Legacy of Luther Strode, there's a bit where Luther is going up against a character called the Shooter, and there is this sequence that takes place in the stairwell. And I can't describe it, and I literally couldn't describe it ahead of time. I can't describe it even having looked at it for years, because I just don't have that kind of mind, right? So the essential like story rhythms of it were there, but Trad took it and turned it into this awesomely laid out, like, kind of 4-dimensional thing that you sort of have to see to believe. And so that was kind of how the working process went. And generally speaking, that's how I try to roll with artists. I like to make sure that even in the non-action scenes, like, look, what I have written down in terms of panel descriptions and that stuff is an idea of how this should go. And I think those beats are the right beats. But if you have better ways to how to make that work on the page, cool, let's go for it. And honestly, if you think there are better beats in that story, let me know. Let's talk about it. Like, you know, I am out to make the best comic book. And, you know, also I get credit as writer no matter what. So the better that comic looks, the better it all goes. So get those extra notes in there, guys. But yeah, I have a very methodical approach to writing in general, and action scenes have not been a thing. And I think they're a strength of mine. I think we've got some, like in Zero Ghost in particular, like I was trying to think of kind of iconic both sequences and panels. And as Brian has appreciated, I think I would just try to see stuff that is cool, that looks cool, because it's supposed to be a cool book. Like, what is the awesome way to depict this? What would be an awesome image that like 13-year-old me would like pick up a comic on the stand and be like, fuck yeah. I don't know if I'm allowed to start, so beat me out there. But like that was kind of the vibe we were going for. So that is my shortest possible answer to that question, considering I'm me.
No, that's an awesome answer. I'm sure that person is going to love hearing about some of the detail and the thought that went into that. And then I did mention I had a couple comments. The other comment, it wasn't really a question for the AMA, but it was a comment. There's a little bit of a question tacked on the end, and it was for Brian, and it was from Prestige Worldwide Comics. And the comment was just that your work on Star Wars literally is this person's favorite Star Wars stuff of all time, which is saying a lot because there's a lot of great Star Wars things out there. So they just wanted to really give, Prestige Worldwide is a comic book shop in Montana. They really wanted to give you props for that. They also said they would love to have you out there for some kind of event or just to have you come through at some point. So if you're ever in the neighborhood or maybe we can work something out, I think that was kind of the question is, any chance you might come out to Montana? So a lot of praise for you out there as well, Brian. I just wanted to make sure we pointed that out too.
Oh, thank you.
Brian, when you're ready, we'll do a double day road trip to Montana.
Okay.
Fear and loathing in Montana.
You'll be getting closer to my neck of the woods too, so maybe we can swim through there.
I like Montana. I spent a month there. I spent a couple weeks out there last August. It was fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it. Great shop, great place, and great panel we've had here on the show today. We are pretty much running out of time here, so we are going to wrap up. But I do want to take this last chance to say that we do have the Zero Ghost campaign. If you want to, this has been an amazing story. We talked about all the fun that's happening behind the team that's creating this comic book and the fun they had making the comic book and the comic book. You can go get it right now on Kickstarter. The link is in the description of this video if you want to go get a chance to get your copies of this today. I highly recommend it. I've read it. I think it's a great story. If you look at the Kickstarter page and you like what you're seeing, you're going to love the story. Trust me. And then the other thing I wanted to say is we do have New York City Comic Con coming up. So as we wrap up the video, I want to make sure to point out that it sounds like most of the panel here is actually going to be at New York City Comic Con, hanging out in Artist Alley, either over at Justin's booth or over at Will's booth. So make sure you go say hi, talk about the campaign, but get your copies pre-ordered on the Kickstarter first.
Bring them with you.
Exactly. So we do appreciate everybody coming on the show today. I can't wait for the official launch of the actual comic book. I think it's going to be great for a lot of people. I can't wait for people to get a chance to actually get to read the whole thing. And I just want to thank everybody so much for being here today on the panel. I really appreciated getting to know all of you a little bit more and hear more about the comic book. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bronx.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. We'll see you on the next one. And don't forget, read comics every day.